You are listening to HOA Citation Circus. The HOA tried to weaponize a property line. I am standing in my own driveway in Calgary, Alberta, holding a single fence panel that weighs maybe 30 pounds, and Patricia is already screaming at me from the sidewalk. She is waving her phone in the air like a weapon, her face is bright red, and she is yelling that I am in violation of outdoor storage rules. The panel has been leaning against my garage for exactly 10 minutes while I catch my breath, and she is acting like I dumped a junkyard on the lawn. Patricia is the vendor coordinator for the landing at Harborview HOA Incorporated, which means she threatens contractors and service techs for a living, and she loves her job. She is a middle-aged white woman with gray shoulder-length wavy hair, wearing a pink light jacket and a blue sun hat, and she has a cheap plastic badge clipped to her collar that says Board Liaison in tiny letters. She wears that badge everywhere, and she taps it with one finger whenever she wants you to remember she has power. I moved to Calgary 2 years ago for work. I am a water treatment plant operator, and my schedule is strict. I work rotating shifts, I sleep weird hours, and I do not have time for HOA drama. The Landing is one of those communities where the neighborhood portal is full of fence photos and accusations, and every other post is someone getting reported for painting their mailbox the wrong shade of beige. I knew the HOA was active when I bought the house, but I thought active meant organized, not predatory. The trouble started this morning when I pulled one rotting fence panel off the back corner of my yard. The wood was splitting, the nails were rusted through, and it was sagging so bad it looked like it might fall on its own. I planned to haul it to the curb later, so I leaned it against the side of my garage while I grabbed water and checked my phone. That is when Patricia rolled up in her white sedan, parked at the curb, and started taking photos like I was running a chop shop. She is still yelling now, and I can feel my jaw tightening. She says I need to remove the panel immediately or she will issue a formal violation notice. I tell her it has been 10 minutes and she cuts me off and says the rules do not have a time limit. She pulls out her phone and starts reading from the covenants like she is a lawyer, and I can see a delivery driver stuck at the curb behind her car, watching the whole thing with his window down. I take a breath and ask her if she has anything better to do than camp out in front of my house. She smiles, and it is the kind of smile that makes you want to check your tires later. She says if you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. Then she taps her plastic badge and tells me she will bury me in notices until I run out of printer ink. That is the first time she says it, and I write it down in my head because later I am going to need it. Patricia gets back in her car and drives off, and the delivery driver gives me a sympathetic nod before he pulls away. I haul the panel to the curb and go inside to cool down. I have to be at the plant in 4 hours and I am already running on 5 hours of sleep. I pour a glass of water and sit at the kitchen table, and I try to convince myself that this is over. It is not over. 2 days later I get a certified letter from the HOA. Inside is a violation notice for outdoor storage, dated the same day Patricia yelled at me, and a fine for $75. The notice says I stored construction materials in a visible location for an extended period, and I need to submit a compliance photo within 10 days or the fine doubles. There is no mention of the fact that the panel was gone within an hour. There is no acknowledgement that I was actively fixing my fence. It is just a flat accusation and a demand for money. I call the HOA management office and get a voicemail. I leave a message explaining what happened, and I attach a photo showing the empty driveway from later that same day. I do not hear back. 3 days pass, and I get a second letter. This one says I am non-compliant because I have not submitted the required photo, and my fine is now $150. I feel my blood pressure spike, and I call again. This time someone picks up, and I explain the situation from the start. The woman on the phone sounds bored, and she tells me all fines are handled by the board, and I need to submit a written appeal. I write the appeal that night. I keep it short and factual. I explain that the panel was temporary, that it was removed promptly, and that I have photographic proof. I attach timestamps, I reference the covenant section Patricia cited, and I ask for the fine to be waived. I mail it certified, and I wait. A week goes by with no response. Then I get a third letter, and this one is worse. It says my appeal was denied because the board determined that my outdoor storage violated community standards, and I now owe $225 because I missed the payment deadline while waiting for the appeal. That is when I realize what is happening. The HOA is refusing to accept my payments and then charging me late fees for the refusal. It is a loop, and Patricia is running it. I am trying to keep peace with neighbors, and the HOA is turning everyone against me. My next-door neighbor stops waving. Someone leaves a passive-aggressive note on my mailbox about keeping the street clean, even though my yard is spotless. The neighborhood group chat has a thread about property values, and I can tell it is about me even though no one uses my name. I call my attorney. Her name is Angela, and she handled my home purchase. I explain the situation, and she listens without interrupting. When I finish, she says this is classic selective enforcement, and it is probably happening to other people too. She tells me to document everything, keep copies of all correspondence, and do not pay the fine yet because paying it might be seen as admitting fault. She also says she needs one more document from me today, and the HOA is stalling to run out the clock, so I need to push back hard and fast. I ask her what document, and she says she needs the original covenant packet with the fence guidelines, because the HOA is citing rules that might not actually exist in writing. I tell her I have the packet somewhere, and she says find it now, because if I wait until tomorrow the window closes and we lose leverage. I hang up and start digging through my files. I find the packet in a drawer under some old tax forms, and I scan the fence section. It is 3 paragraphs long, and it is vague. It talks about height, materials, and setback, but it does not define outdoor storage, and it does not mention temporary repairs. I email the scan to Angela, and she calls me back 10 minutes later. She says the HOA is stretching the rules, and we can fight this, but we need to get ahead of the next escalation. I ask her what escalation, and she says they are going to come after the fence repair itself. She tells me to get a permit if I need one, hire a licensed contractor, and make sure everything is documented, because Patricia is going to look for any excuse to shut me down. I do not waste time. I call a local fence company that same afternoon, and I book a free estimate. The guy who shows up is named Marco, and he has been doing fence work in Calgary for 15 years. He walks the property line with me, and he points out that my back fence is original to the neighborhood build, which means it is at least 20 years old. Half the panels are rotted, the posts are leaning, and the whole thing is a liability. He says I need a full replacement, not a patch job, and he can do it in 3 days if I sign today. I ask him about permits, and he says residential fence replacement does not need a permit in Calgary as long as I stay under 6 feet and I do not touch the property line survey. He shows me his contractor license, his insurance certificate, and a portfolio of past jobs in landing at Harborview. He says he has worked in this neighborhood before, and he knows the HOA is strict, so he always follows the covenants to the letter. I feel a little relief for the first time in days, and I sign the contract. Marco says he will start Monday morning, which is 4 days away. I go back inside and email Angela with the update, and she replies within the hour. She says good, and she reminds me to take photos of every stage of the work, because Patricia is going to show up. She also says I should let the neighbors know in advance so no one is surprised, and I should keep a log of anyone who comes onto my property without permission. I spend the weekend getting ready. I knock on my neighbors' doors and let them know the fence crew is coming Monday. Most of them are fine with it. One guy says he is glad someone is finally fixing the eyesore, and another woman says she wishes the HOA would let her replace hers too, but they keep rejecting her paint color. No one mentions Patricia, but I can tell everyone knows who I am talking about when I say the HOA has been difficult. On Sunday night I get a text from Marco. He says he just got a call from someone claiming to be HOA enforcement, and they told him he is not allowed to work on my property because I do not have approval. I call him immediately, and he sounds frustrated. He says the caller was a woman, She had his number from a previous job, and she told him the HOA has a stop work order on file for my address. I ask if he got her name, and he says she did not give one, but she said she was calling on behalf of the board. I know it is Patricia. I call Angela and leave a voicemail, and then I text Marco and tell him to ignore the call and show up Monday as planned. He hesitates, and I can hear it in his typing. He says he does not want trouble with the HOA because he works in this neighborhood a lot, and getting blacklisted would hurt his business. I tell him I will handle it, and I will have my attorney send a letter if I need to, but he needs to show up. He finally agrees, but he says if anyone from the HOA shows up on site and threatens him, he is leaving. Monday morning arrives, and Marco and his crew pull up at 7. They unload tools, a pallet of new fence panels, bags of concrete mix, and a post hole digger. I go outside with coffee and my tabbed binder tucked under one arm, and I watch them mark the property line with stakes and string. The plan is to pull the old fence, dig new post holes, set the posts in concrete, and hang the panels. It is straightforward work, and Marco says they should be done by Wednesday afternoon. At 7:30, Patricia shows up. She parks at the curb, gets out wearing her pink jacket and blue sun hat, and walks straight into my yard without asking. She is holding her phone in one hand and her plastic badge in the other, and she is already talking before she reaches the fence line. She says the work needs to stop immediately because I do not have HOA approval. Marco stops digging and looks at me, and I can see the crew watching to see what happens next. I step between Patricia and the crew, and I tell her the work is permitted and the contractor is licensed. She ignores me and talks directly to Marco. She says if he continues, the HOA will fine him personally and report him to the city. Marco sets his shovel down, and I can see him starting to second-guess the whole job. I pull out my phone and start recording, and Patricia notices immediately. She steps closer and says I am not allowed to record her without consent. I tell her we are on my property, and in Canada I can record anyone I want as long as I am part of the conversation. She changes tactics. She says the fence height is wrong, the setback is wrong, and the posts are not aligned with the survey. I ask her to show me the written guideline, and she says the guideline is in the covenants. I pull out my binder, flip to the fence section, and read it out loud. It says fences must be 6 feet or under, wood or vinyl, and set back at least 6 inches from the property line. I tell her Marco is doing exactly that, and I ask her to point out the violation. Patricia does not answer. Instead, she says the board has discretion to reject any project that does not meet community standards, and my fence does not meet standards. I ask her what standards, and she taps her badge and says, if you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA. That is the second time, and I am definitely writing it down later. She turns to Marco and says she is going to report this to the management company, and he is going to lose his contractor rating in the system. Marco looks at me, and I can see he is about to fold. I tell Patricia to leave my property, and she laughs. She says this is HOA common area and she has a right to inspect. I tell her the property line is marked, and she is standing on my side. She ignores me and pulls out her phone to make a call. I do not know who she is calling, but I assume it is the management office or maybe another board member. While she is on the phone, I text Angela. I tell her Patricia is here, she is threatening the contractor, and she is claiming the work is not approved. Angela responds in under a minute. She says do not let Marco leave, do not stop the work, and tell Patricia you have legal representation and all communications need to go through your attorney. She also says she is sending a letter to the management company right now, and if Patricia trespasses again, we are filing a police report. I read Angela's text to Patricia while she is still on her call. She hangs up immediately, and her face goes even redder. She says I am interfering with HOA business, and she is going to escalate this to the board president. I tell her that is fine, and she can send all future communication to my attorney. I give her Angela's email address, and Patricia writes it down on her phone with shaking hands. Then she says I am going to regret this, and she walks back to her car. Marco watches her drive away, and then he turns to me and says he is not sure he wants to continue. I understand where he is coming from, but I cannot let this project die. I tell him I will cover any fines the HOA tries to hit him with, and I will have my attorney send a letter protecting him as a third-party contractor. He thinks about it for a long moment, and then he nods. He says he has been doing this long enough to know when someone is bluffing, and Patricia sounded like she was making it up as she went. He picks up his shovel, and the crew gets back to work. By lunchtime, the old fence is down and stacked in a debris pile. The posts are out, and the crew has started digging new holes. The ground is harder than expected, so it is taking longer, but Marco says they are still on schedule. I bring out water bottles and sandwiches, and the crew takes a break in the shade. That is when I see the orange cone. It is lying on its side near one of the property stakes, and it was not there this morning. I walk over and pick it up, and I see a piece of paper tucked under it. The paper is a printed notice, and it has the HOA logo at the top. It says work stoppage order in bold letters, and it is dated today. There is no signature, no board vote, no reference number. It is just a piece of paper with a threat, and I know Patricia left it while we were not looking. I show Marco the notice, and he curses under his breath. He says this is exactly what he was worried about, and if the HOA is issuing stop work orders, he cannot risk his license. I call Angela immediately, and she picks up on the first ring. I read her the notice, and she asks if there is a signature or a board resolution number. I tell her no, and she says then it is not a real order. She says Patricia is trying to intimidate us, and we should ignore it and keep working. She also says she is going to call the management company and demand an emergency hearing, because this has crossed the line into harassment. I relay that to Marco, and he agrees to keep going, but he says if any one official shows up, he is done. I tell him that is fair, and I go back to watching the crew. By mid-afternoon, the post holes are dug, and the crew is mixing concrete. They set the first post, check it with a level, and pour the concrete. It looks good, and Marco says the posts need to cure overnight before they can hang the panels. At 4, Patricia comes back. This time she has backup. There are 2 other people with her, a man and a woman, both wearing reflective vests with HOA volunteer printed on the back in small letters. They walk into my yard without asking, and Patricia is holding a clipboard. She says they are here to conduct an inspection, and the work needs to stop until the inspection is complete. I step in front of them and ask to see their credentials. The man says he is on the Architectural Review Committee, and the woman says she is the Compliance Secretary. Neither of them has a badge, and neither of them gives me a name. Patricia taps her plastic badge and says they have the authority to inspect any construction in progress, and if I interfere, I am in violation of obstruction rules. I pull out my phone and start recording again. I ask Patricia if she has a warrant, and she says the HOA does not need a warrant to enforce covenants. I tell her this is private property and she is trespassing. She ignores me and walks past me toward the post holes. Marco steps in front of her and says she cannot touch the worksite, and if she does, he is calling the police. Patricia stops, and for a second I think she is going to back down, but then she pulls out her phone and says she is calling the police herself. I let her. She dials and waits, and when someone picks up, she starts talking fast. She says there is illegal construction happening, the contractor is threatening her, and she needs an officer to respond. She gives my address, and then she hangs up and smiles at me. She says the police are on their way, and we are all going to have a conversation about who has authority here. I am not worried. I have my permits, my contracts, my attorney on speed dial, and a recording of everything Patricia has said. Marco looks less confident, but he stays put. The 2 volunteers stand awkwardly behind Patricia, and I get the sense they are not sure why they are here. One of them keeps looking at the concrete posts like he is trying to figure out what is wrong with them, and the other one is checking her phone. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmares. 10 minutes later, a Calgary police cruiser pulls up. One officer gets out, a young guy in uniform, and he walks up the driveway with his hands loose at his sides. He asks what is going on, and Patricia jumps in before I can speak. She says I am doing unpermitted construction, I am ignoring HOA orders, and the contractor is being aggressive. The officer looks at Marco, then at me, and then at the post holes. I hand him my phone, still recording, and I explain the situation from the start. I tell him I hired a licensed contractor to replace my fence. The HOA has been harassing me with fake fines and fake stop work orders, and Patricia just trespassed onto my property with 2 volunteers. I show him the contract, Marco's license, and the notice Patricia left under the orange cone. The officer takes his time reading everything, and then he asks Patricia if she has documentation for the stop work order. Patricia fumbles with her clipboard and pulls out a blank form. She says the order is pending board approval and it will be finalized at the next meeting. The officer asks when the next meeting is, and Patricia says next Thursday. He looks at her, then at me, and says if the order is not finalized, then it is not enforceable. He hands my phone back and tells Patricia she needs to leave the property unless she has a court order or a city permit authorizing the inspection. Patricia's face goes from red to pale. She starts to argue, but the officer cuts her off and says if she does not leave, he is going to cite her for trespassing. The 2 volunteers are already backing toward the street, and Patricia realizes she is alone. She says this is not over, and she turns and walks to her car. The officer watches her drive away, and then he asks me if I want to file a report. I tell him yes, and he takes my information and gives me an incident number. He says I should follow up with a formal complaint if the harassment continues, and he recommends I get a no trespass order if Patricia comes back. After the officer leaves, Marco lets out a long breath. He says that was the closest he has ever come to walking off a job, and he is glad I stood my ground. I thank him, and I tell him to finish up for the day and come back tomorrow to hang the panels. He agrees, and the crew packs up their tools. I go inside, pour a drink, and call Angela. She says the police report is good, and we are building a strong case for harassment. She also says she got a response from the management company, and they scheduled an emergency board meeting for Wednesday night to discuss my complaint. I ask her what complaint, and she says the one she filed this afternoon on my behalf. She tells me she sent them a formal letter outlining Patricia's behavior, the fake fines, the fake stop work orders, the trespassing, and the threats to the contractor. She says the management company is taking it seriously because they do not want legal liability, and they are going to force the board to address it. She also says I need to attend the meeting and bring evidence, because this is my chance to flip the whole thing. I spend Tuesday preparing. I print every email, every letter, every photo, and every timestamp. I organize it all in my binder with tabs, and I write a short statement summarizing the timeline. Angela reviews it and says it is solid, but she tells me to expect Patricia to lie. She says Patricia is going to claim she never trespassed, she never threatened anyone, and the fines are legitimate. Angela says that is where the trump card comes in. I have been holding on to something. A few days ago, I got a call from a towing company. The guy on the phone said someone from the HOA requested a tow for a vehicle parked on my property, and he wanted to confirm before he dispatched a truck. I told him no one is parked illegally on my property, and he sounded confused. He said the caller gave him my address and said there was an abandoned contractor truck blocking access. I asked him to send me a copy of the call recording, and he said he would check with his manager. The recording arrived in my email yesterday. It is Patricia. She is asking the tow company to remove Marco's truck without confirming ownership, without checking if the truck is legally parked, and without proper paperwork. The tow operator asks her for a board resolution or a signed authorization, and she says she does not have one, but she has the authority as vendor coordinator. The operator says he cannot tow without documentation, and Patricia gets angry and hangs up. I wrote down every word, because later I plan to read them back to her. Angela says this is gold. because it shows intent to interfere with the contractor, and it proves Patricia is acting outside her authority. She tells me to bring a second copy for the HOA attorney so the legal risk is obvious, and to wait until the right moment to deploy it. Wednesday morning, Marco and his crew come back to hang the panels. The posts have cured, and the concrete is solid. They work fast, measuring each panel, leveling it, and screwing it into place. By noon, the fence is halfway done, and it looks great. The panels are straight, the height is correct, and the setback is exactly 6 inches from the property line. Marco double-checks everything with his tape measure, and he takes photos of each section for his records. At 1, Patricia shows up again. This time she is alone, and she is carrying a tape measure of her own. She walks up to the fence line and announces that she is going to verify the measurements because she does not trust the contractor. Marco stops working and watches her. I step outside with my phone recording, and I ask Patricia what she is doing. She says she is exercising her right to inspect HOA property, and the fence line is HOA common area. I tell her the fence is on my property, 6 inches inside the line, and she has no authority to touch it. She ignores me and stretches her tape measure from the fence to the property stake. She measures once, frowns, and measures again. Then she says the fence is too close to the line, and it needs to be moved back another 6 inches. Marco laughs, and I can see he is done being polite. He walks over with his own tape measure, pulls the string line tight between 2 stakes, and shows Patricia that the fence is exactly 6 inches back. Patricia says the string line is wrong, and she demands her own measurement. Marco hands her his tape and she stretches it from the stake to the fence. It reads 6 inches. She checks it twice, and then she tries a different stake. Still 6 inches. Her face is getting red again, and I can see her trying to figure out how to argue with a tape measure. Finally, she says the measurement does not matter because the fence style is not approved, and the board is going to reject it anyway. I ask her to show me the style guidelines, and she says they are in the architectural review packet. I pull out my binder and flip to the section. It says fences must be wood or vinyl, vertical or horizontal slats, and natural or painted finish. Marco's fence is wood, vertical slats, and natural cedar. I read the guideline out loud, and I ask Patricia to explain the violation. She does not answer. Instead, she says the meeting tonight is going to settle this, and I better be ready to defend myself. She turns and walks back to her car, but before she gets in, she stops and takes a photo of the fence with her phone. I take a photo of her taking the photo, and I send it to Angela with a note that says Patricia is still gathering ammunition. Angela replies immediately and says good. Let her dig herself deeper. By 3, the fence is finished. Marco and his crew clean up the site, haul away the old panels, and rake the dirt smooth. The fence looks perfect. It is level, solid, and exactly to code. Marco hands me a completion certificate, a warranty card, and a set of photos documenting the install. He says if the HOA gives me any more trouble, I can show them his license and insurance, and they will have to accept it. I thank him and pay the final invoice, and he drives off. I have 2 hours before the board meeting, so I take a shower, change into clean clothes, and review my notes one more time. Angela calls at 5 and walks me through the plan. She says I am going to present my evidence first. Patricia is going to lie and deflect, and then I am going to deploy the trump card. She says the management company attorney will be in the room, and once they hear the tow company recording, they are going to shut Patricia down hard because the liability is too high. The meeting is at 7, held in the clubhouse at the front of the neighborhood. I arrive early and sit in the back row. The room is set up with a long table at the front for the board, rows of chairs for homeowners, and a projector screen on the side wall. There are maybe 20 people in the room, and I recognize a few faces from the street. One of them is my next-door neighbor, who gives me a nod. Another is a guy I have seen at the mailbox, and he is holding a folder that looks a lot like mine. Patricia walks in at 6:55, wearing her pink jacket and her plastic badge. She sits at the front table with 4 other board members, including the president, a man in his 60s with a gray beard and a bored expression. The management company attorney sits off to the side with a laptop, and he looks like he would rather be anywhere else. The president calls the meeting to order and says they are here to discuss a complaint filed by a homeowner regarding vendor coordinator conduct. He does not say my name, but everyone knows who he is talking about. He asks me to come forward and present my case, and I walk to the front with my binder. I start with the timeline. I explain the fence panel incident, the fake outdoor storage fine, the refusal to accept my appeal, the escalating late fees, the fake stop work order, the trespassing with volunteers, and the police report. I show photos, timestamps, and copies of every letter. The room is silent, and I can see a few people in the audience taking notes. Patricia is staring at me with her arms crossed, and I can tell she is waiting for her turn. When I finish, the president asks Patricia to respond. She stands up and says I am exaggerating, and she was simply enforcing the rules. She says the outdoor storage fine was legitimate, the stop work order was pending board approval, and she never trespassed because HOA officials have the right to inspect common areas. She says I am being difficult and combative, and I am wasting the board's time with false complaints. I let her finish, and then I ask her a direct question. I say, Patricia, did you ever come to my property on the day of the fence panel incident? She says no, she only observed from the street. I pull out my phone, open the doorbell video, and play it on the projector screen. The video shows Patricia walking up my driveway, taking photos of the fence panel, and standing in my yard for over 2 minutes. The timestamp matches the day of the violation notice, and you can hear her voice on the recording saying she is going to bury me in notices. The room erupts. Patricia's face goes white, and she starts to say the video is edited, but the attorney interrupts her and says the metadata is clear, and the video is authentic. The president asks Patricia why she lied, and she does not answer. One of the other board members, a woman in her 50s, stands up and says this is unacceptable, and the board needs to take action immediately. That is when my ally speaks up. His name is Dan, and he is a homeowner who has been in the neighborhood for 10 years. He is also on the Architectural Review Committee, and he is well liked. He stands and says he has seen Patricia do this to other homeowners, and it is time the board stops selective enforcement. He says he has a file of complaints about Patricia going back 3 years, and if the board does not address it tonight, he is going to bring it to the next annual meeting and call for her removal. The room goes quiet, and I can see the president realizing this is bigger than one complaint. He asks Dan to submit his file to the management company, and Dan says he already did. The attorney opens his laptop and confirms that he received a packet this afternoon with multiple documented incidents of Patricia overstepping her authority, issuing fines without board votes, and threatening contractors. The president looks at Patricia and asks if she has anything to say. She says the complaints are coordinated, and I am trying to undermine the HOA. I let her talk, and then I pull out the trump card. I hand the attorney a printed transcript of the tow company recording, and I play the audio on my phone. Patricia's voice comes through the speaker, asking the tow operator to remove Marco's truck without documentation, and getting angry when he refuses. The attorney stops the recording halfway through and says this is a serious legal issue, because Patricia attempted to authorize a tow without proper authority, and if the truck had been towed, the HOA could be sued for conversion and harassment. He looks at the president and says the board needs to take immediate disciplinary action, or the management company is going to recommend terminating the contract with Patricia. Patricia stands up and says I am twisting her words, and she was just trying to enforce parking rules. The attorney plays the rest of the recording, where Patricia explicitly says she does not have a board resolution, and she is acting on her own authority. When the recording ends, Patricia sits down and does not say another word. The president calls for a 5-minute recess, and the board huddles with the attorney. When they come back, the president announces that Patricia is being placed on administrative leave pending a full review, and all fines related to my fence dispute are being waived. He also says the board is going to implement a written no retaliation policy with penalties, and any future enforcement actions will require a board vote on record. The room applauds, and I see Dan grinning from his seat. Patricia grabs her bag and walks out without looking at anyone. The meeting adjourns and several homeowners come up to thank me. One woman says Patricia fined her for a garden gnome last year, and she is going to file a complaint now that she knows the board is listening. Another guy says he was threatened with a lien over a mailbox color, and he wants to know if he can get his fine refunded too. I leave the clubhouse at 8:30, and I drive home feeling lighter than I have in weeks. The fence is done, the fines are gone, and Patricia is out. When I pull into my driveway, I see Marco's truck parked at the curb. He is sitting on the tailgate with a coffee, and he waves when he sees me. He says he heard about the meeting from another contractor, and he wanted to make sure I was okay. I tell him it went well, and I thank him for sticking with the job. He says he has worked with a lot of HOAs, and this was the first time he has ever seen one actually hold someone accountable. Over the next 2 weeks, things settle down. The management company sends me a formal letter confirming the fine waiver and the new no retaliation policy. Patricia resigns from the board entirely, and the vendor coordinator position is eliminated. The architectural review committee gets restructured, and Dan is elected as the new chair. He emails me to say the committee is going to start publishing all decisions with written justifications, so no one can be targeted like I was. I also get a call from the county inspector. He says someone filed a complaint about my fence, claiming it violates setback clearance, and he is required to inspect. I tell him to come by any time, and he shows up the next day. He measures the fence, checks the survey, and takes photos. Then he says the fence is perfect, and whoever filed the complaint does not understand the code. He asks if I know who filed it, and I say I have a guess. He says if it happens again, I should file a counter-complaint for harassment, because false code reports waste city resources. I ask him what would happen if the HOA had forced me to move the fence like Patricia demanded, and he says it would have violated code clearance and put me out of compliance with the city. He says the HOA was asking me to break the law, and if I had listened, I would have been the one getting fined. The room goes silent when I repeat that story to my neighbors, and a few of them admit Patricia told them to do things that were probably illegal too. The neighborhood culture starts to shift. People stop being afraid to ask questions, and the board starts being more transparent. The group chat goes from being a complaint zone to being a place where people share information and help each other. Someone posts a link to the full covenant packet, and for the first time everyone can see the actual rules instead of relying on Patricia's interpretations. 3 months later, the HOA holds its annual meeting. The turnout is huge, and there are at least 60 homeowners in the room. The president announces that the board has received over 30 complaints about selective enforcement in the past year, and they are implementing a new process where all fines require a documented violation, a written notice with a correction timeline, and a board vote before any money is due. He also says the management company is conducting an audit of all fines issued in the past 2 years, and anyone who was overcharged will get a refund. Dan stands up and says the architectural review committee is going to publish a style guide with photos and examples, so homeowners know what is allowed before they start a project. He also says the committee is going to offer pre-approval consultations for free, so no one gets surprised by a rejection after they have already spent money. The room applauds, and I can see people finally starting to trust the process again. I run into Patricia once more, about 6 months after the meeting. I am at a hardware store picking up paint, and I see her in the garden section. She sees me too, and for a second I think she is going to say something, but she just turns and walks the other way. I do not chase her, and I do not gloat. The fence is up, the fines are gone, and the HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints piled up. That is enough. My next-door neighbor tells me later that Patricia moved out of the neighborhood entirely. He says she listed her house quietly and closed in under a month. No one knows where she went, and no one asks. The new vendor coordinator is a retired engineer named Alan, and he is calm, methodical, and actually reads the covenants before he enforces them. He introduces himself at a board meeting and says his job is to help homeowners comply, not to punish them for trying. The fence still stands, solid and straight, and every time I look at it I remember the string line measurement scene where Patricia demanded her own tape test and got embarrassed by straight line proof. I remember the wet concrete moment where she tried to force changes after the posts were set and the crew refused. I remember handing the officer on scene a clean packet and asking for an incident number. And I remember the moment her own quote played back on speaker in a room full of witnesses, and she had nothing left to say. The settlement removed all fines tied to the fence dispute and added a written no retaliation policy with penalties, and the complaint to the management company triggered real discipline. The HOA is not perfect now, but it is better. People are not afraid to fix their homes, and the board is not weaponizing the rules. That is all I ever wanted. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.